Welcome to the video, guys. Today this one's going to be all about footwork and how I've personally developed my own footwork in my martial arts training. Now, a lot of people have asked me to do a video about this, but honestly, the way I like to approach footwork is not something I've kind of consciously trained in isolation, you could say. And I think it's more as a result of just training lots of different things in martial arts, and kind of the footwork has evolved through that. But there certainly are some foundational principles that you can apply that I'm going to be teaching in this video to help you do the same. So there certainly are some basic footwork patterns that you can practice as a beginner, and I definitely suggest that you do those. But you want to make it kind of free-flowing. The enemy of spontaneity is thinking. So you don't always want to be thinking about what you're doing, because then you're not spontaneous. And so the way that I like to always approach this kind of stuff is, firstly, you want to learn the rules. You want to train them to a level where you get close to perfecting them, you could say, and only then you can kind of break it and go into this sort of free-flowing state. But you want to always keep that at the back of your mind and don't become too robotic and rigid in your movements as well. Improving your footwork is obviously essential for becoming a more dynamic and effective martial artist, and it's probably the most important thing you can work on. Actually, I would always suggest to beginners not to rush to trying to do complex striking sequences, but first work upon their general balance and movement on the floor, and then all that stuff afterwards is kind of secondary and becomes much easier to do. And a great example of this is the boxer Lomachenko, whose dad actually had him train in this traditional form of Ukrainian dance, because he knew that in boxing all of the prowess, all of the striking prowess comes from the feet, and obviously Lomachenko is known as one of the people to have the best footwork in boxing, so it definitely pays off. So continually practicing this footwork and improving it will allow you to control your distance, maintain balance, and set up attacks or defenses with precision. And the key word there is balance, because if you can't strike with balance, you're going to walk right into opponent's strikes. So the first thing that we need to speak about is having proper balance in your stance and being able to maintain that balance as you move around. So we all have different stances that we like to use in our striking, and it generally tends to come from the styles that you've trained in, obviously. And I have kind of quite a hybrid style. I like to switch between stances, and I do it quite unconsciously just because of lots of time of training. I generally tend to stand quite side on in a kind of more like a sport karate type stance when I'm at a distance, but then when I come in close, I'll square up a little bit into more of a boxing stance. But you need to be able to transition between these seamlessly and without being clunky, because if you're always, again, having to think about what you're doing, then that's going to make you ineffective and it's going to slow down your reaction times. Now, the key things, whatever stance you use, is you need to make sure that it's balanced, comfortable, and you're ready to move on a dime, so you can just explode from that movement whenever you need to. And you're also going to have to get used to the alterations that you make in your stance as well, depending on your own unique style of movement. One of the most important things that many beginners struggle with is maintaining proper weight distribution between the legs in the stance. And what they'll do is, they might be okay when they're standing there, but as they begin to strike, because they're not as used to distance, they will kind of lunge in and kind of really put themselves off balance, often putting most of their weight on their front leg, which is fine if you're hitting something like a bag. But the problem with training with tools like that predominantly or all the time is you don't get used to what happens if the bag isn't there and you miss, because when that bag's there, it provides a buffer. So if you hit, even if you weighted on the front leg, that's going to stop you. As soon as you go into sparring with somebody, you might strike and miss, and then you're going to walk right into a counter attack. And so the importance of this is you want to be not too far forward or too far backwards, so that you can quickly shift or pivot when required. And proper weight distribution will ensure that you're not caught off guard. So if you're too far forward or too far backwards, then that's going to mean that you've got to basically correct yourself before you can move again, and so your reaction times are going to be greatly slowed down. So a little practice exercise that I suggest for this is really, really simple, and I still like to do this all the time when I'm warming up, is basically just move around in your stance and perform some nice shifting movements backwards, forwards, and laterally, and doing some pivots and things like that as well before you start adding strikes in, say, to your shadow boxing. And when you're moving, you want to ensure that your weight is balanced between the balls of your feet, and you're keeping your center of gravity low and centered, making sure that you can move in any direction with minimal effort. Now, it's very important as well to remain light on your feet, because doing this allows you to have faster movement and quicker reactions. So you can see from these clips as I'm moving around here, I'm very light on my toes and I'm not thudding down between each of the movements, because if you're too heavy on your feet, you'll be slower and less responsive. So practice moving with a slight bend in your knees so that you can basically absorb the pressure of the different distance changes, keeping your body centered and your weight evenly distributed. And you can almost imagine like you're trying to sneak into somewhere, so you're not trying to make any noise with your feet, okay? And that'll keep you nice and light on your toes. Although it's not footwork per se, I highly recommend doing some skipping in order to develop this as well, and it'll really help with your rhythm and your timing in those movements. So again, skipping is another thing I always do to warm up. I like to do a few rounds and it just gets the blood flowing. It also prepares you for the types of movement and the training that you're going to be doing as well. And you need to use quick and short steps, because what that does is it enables you to not overcommit too much into a single direction. If you're shooting massively forward, then the kind of inertia of that movement is going to all come into your legs, and then you've got to recorrect it once again. And think of kind of stepping stepping in rather than lunging over huge distances. And I would say when you're getting used to this, you actually want to take steps that you think are probably shorter than you actually need, because it's always better to undercommit and then move again rather than overcommit and put yourself into a dangerous position. Also, practice moving in different directions. So you're not just going forwards and back, and you're not just keeping to movement patterns that you're familiar with. You want to change it up a little bit so that it's more spontaneous. And this will also massively help with fluidity, which is another thing a lot of people desire, to be able to strike and move with a seamless sense of fluidity, and it'll make you unpredictable and adaptable. So you also want to work on lateral or side-to-side movements, as well as diagonal and circular movements into your training. And you can also incorporate doing these onto the agility ladder, which I'm going to be speaking about more later in the video. And these are all going to help you build to be able to move in directions quickly. So you never want to be stuck in one direction. And you also want to think that whenever you're moving towards one side, for instance, you need to be able to instantly switch and move to that other side after, which comes into developing agility as well. If you're enjoying this video so far, guys, you can get a full PDF breakdown of everything I'm discussing in the video by joining my free Telegram group. The QR code is appearing on the screen now. It's really just a valuable group where I share a lot of insights and things that I'm currently learning about in training that aren't really applicable to share on YouTube. So if you join there, you can get the breakdown as well as loads of other insights. Now, one of the first things I tend to adjust when I'm working with people is their base stance, because a lot of people tend to stand very straight up and their legs are very close together, which means that their balance is going to be harder to maintain that way. So I like to keep my center of gravity lower. You don't have to be like super low and wide, but just enough to basically absorb the shock of those movements so that you can keep your posture and composure. And this also helps obviously for you to be able to absorb strikes as well. So if an opponent is striking towards you, if you're too straight backed all the time, it's going to be easier to push you over. Whereas if you're lower on that center of gravity, you can move or you can absorb punishment better. So as I already said before, keep a slight bend in your knees whenever you're doing this stuff, whenever you're moving basically. Lower your body naturally when advancing or retreating, and it will maintain that solid foundation. Now I just want to mention another big common error that a lot of people make, which is doing way too much bouncing. You are very slightly bouncing, but it's not like you're really leaving the floor when you're doing it. It's more just like a kind of pulse on the balls of your feet as you move. You don't want to be really leaving the floor, because obviously then you have to compensate for that weight coming back down again, which is going to cause that clunkiness and will cause you to be destabilized. And as you become more familiar with that movement, say as you shoot forward, I recommend starting to add some strikes onto that. So you might add a 1-2, a jab cross, and that's going to help you to avoid that lunging, because when you're practicing it again in isolation without that bag to stop you, then you really have to pay attention to all of the biomechanics to make sure that you're on balance the whole time. Now, all of that stuff I've mentioned already is kind of a way to just train the footwork on its own to get used to the movements, but obviously footwork is about more than just movement. It's about reacting to how your opponent moves and being able to adapt to what they're doing. And this is where working upon specific drills to help improve raw agility will really come into play here. And I've got many videos demonstrating some of my favorite ways to work upon and develop this and all of the exercises I do, so I'll just leave a link in the description to one of those for you to check out. One drill that I really like is where you just work with a partner without doing any strikes at all, and you just basically mirror each other's movements. So one person leads and the other follows, and then you basically just mirror what the other person does. So as they shoot forward, you shoot back. As they step to the left, you follow, and you basically get the picture. So you want to start this nice and slowly, so you're kind of getting used to each other, and then speed it up to where it becomes quite intense. And when you're doing this, you should be getting out of breath as well. And that's when you're really hitting that agility and working upon those reaction times and those responses. Other bonus things you can do for this are respond to commands if somebody shouts them out, or I've even said before, you can create your own recording of this if you really want, where you shout out some strikes, then you play it as you're training and you try and react as quick as possible. And then further to that, the plyometric training is just a massive booster for this stuff, and I've got multiple workouts on this channel, so I'll link those in the description as well. Now, we already mentioned using the agility ladder, and that's a great tool with multiple uses. So you can use it for developing just raw agility, where you're doing these intricate footwork patterns and you speed up to get as fast as possible while still keeping the form and the correct steps. Or you can use it specifically for developing your footwork with drills like the following ones I'm about to demonstrate. The first one's super simple, where you just shoot forward and execute a jab cross with one foot into the ladder, then you pull it out, shift to the side, and then repeat. The next one is a little bit more complex, and it involves what's called an L step. So when you do this, you basically pull the lead leg backwards, then you use that to push yourself off to the side, which creates a quick and rapid lateral movement. And then you simply step forward again and execute the technique, repeating it. The last one I like is just performing different variations of pivots, while stepping into the squares in the ladder. So you can see here, sometimes I'm going forwards, sometimes I'm going backwards, but it's good to try different things out like this just to get used to moving in different and unique ways. So the ladder's a really great tool. It'll help improve your foot speed, coordination and quickness. And again, you want to focus upon keeping your feet light and moving fast throughout the different segments. And lastly, another great way to work on this is doing shadow boxing, but with footwork as the focus. So obviously you're still executing all of your striking techniques, but you want to move way more than you normally would perhaps when you were shadow boxing. Going forwards, backwards, sideways and pivoting constantly. And that's going to help visualize and practice the footwork that you might use in real situations. So all of this stuff's going to require a great deal of practice, and you'll need to incorporate some elements of this, I would say, into every training session you do it. And luckily, working upon footwork isn't something that's super taxing on the body. So if you can incorporate just a little bit of this consistently, you're going to really see those gains in that area. It doesn't have to be crazy. You just have to do a little bit every single day. And again, because this is so foundational, it's going to make everything else that you do in your martial arts practice 10 times easier. So I'm always talking about generating energy from the kinetic chain through our legs up through the body and into the strikes. And having that foundation of footwork, stability and balance is going to enable you to do that 10 times more effectively than if you weren't really working upon this stuff. It also translates to just a much greater control of the body and familiarity with the body, because that's really what this stuff's all about. You want to be so familiar with your body that you can essentially make it do anything you want. It gets to a certain level when you're so used to moving, you've trained for such a long time, that learning new skills becomes so easy. It's almost like you can do them after the first few tries just because you've done so much other prior training. And I think this is something that so many people misunderstand, and they just want to go for the high level skills without doing that foundational work. But that's just going to lead to a lot of bad habits, and also things like muscular imbalances if your body isn't prepared for those higher level techniques. Always working upon those simple things that make all the difference and add up to the high level skills. So I hope you enjoyed this one, guys. As mentioned earlier, if you'd like a full breakdown of everything I listed in this video, join my Telegram group where I post a load of other valuable stuff, training tips, different insights and things all about training, lifestyle, nutrition and all that stuff. And with that being said, I will see you in the next video.